where the wind forgets to blow. In a quiet coastal town where time moved slowly and the sea sang lullabies to the sand, lived a young woman named Alara. She was the town's lighthouse keeper, a quiet soul with eyes like storm clouds and a heart that still waited for something, or someone, she couldn't name. Each night, she climbed the winding stairs of the lighthouse, lit the great lantern, and watched as its golden beam swept across the sea. Every evening she wrote letters. Not to anyone real, but to a man she dreamed of. She called him the Windwalker. In her mind, he was a traveler, someone who drifted from place to place, carrying the scent of pine forests and distant lands in his coat. In her letters, she asked him questions, told him about the storms, the seabirds, her loneliness, and how she wished the wind would one day bring him to her. She never sent those letters. She tucked them in a wooden box beneath her bed. One autumn evening, a storm darker than any in years rolled across the horizon. The lighthouse shook as waves crashed against the cliffs. Alara stood her ground, keeping the light burning bright. In the thick of the storm, a knock echoed at the lighthouse door. Soaked to the bone stood a man, tall, weather-worn, eyes full of places he'd seen and things he couldn't forget. He introduced himself as Cale, a sailor whose ship had been caught in the storm. He'd followed the light. She gave him shelter, hot tea, and a quiet place to rest. But he didn't leave the next morning. Or the next. Cale helped repair the storm-damaged roof, stayed to fix the broken window, then offered to stay longer. He read her books she had long forgotten, walked with her along the rocky shore, and listened when she spoke about the sea as if it were alive. And then, one still evening, as the lighthouse beam turned slowly over the waves, she found him in the lantern room, reading one of her letters. She froze, heart thundering. "I didn't mean to invade," he said gently. "But, this letter. You wrote about someone who walks with the wind. I think I've been searching for a place where the wind forgets to blow. And I think it might be here, with you." She didn't speak. She stepped forward and took the letter from his hand, then leaned in and kissed him, softly, like a breeze before a storm. They became inseparable. Their love was quiet, like the sea at dawn. Cale told her stories of the world beyond the waves. Alara taught him the language of seagulls and foghorns. At night, they lit the lantern together and wrote letters, no longer to dreams, but to each other. Years passed. People began to speak of the lighthouse differently. They said that if you stood by the cliffs at twilight, you'd see two shadows moving within the lantern tower. And if you listened closely, you might hear laughter, soft, wind-carried laughter, and the sound of love strong enough to still even the wildest wind. And inside the lighthouse, the wooden box beneath the bed remained. Filled not with unsent letters to a stranger, but with every letter Cale ever wrote to Alara. And every one she wrote to him. The Bridge of Letters. In a quaint village nestled between the rolling hills of southern France, there stood a weathered stone bridge that arched gracefully over a gentle river. The villagers called it Le Pont de Lettres, the Bridge of Letters, because for decades, people had left letters tucked into its cracks, hoping the wind would carry their words to someone they loved. One rainy morning in April, Isabelle Duret, a quiet librarian in her late 20s, wandered across the bridge on her way to the bookshop. Her umbrella trembled in the wind, and the air was laced with the scent of spring. She paused halfway across the bridge and noticed a slip of parchment caught between two stones. Curious, she tugged it free and read. "To the stranger who finds this, I believe in love that travels across time and silence. If you do too, write me back. Leave your letter beneath the ivy at the west end of the bridge. Yours in wonder, E." A small smile played on Isabelle's lips. On a whim, she responded. That night, by the flicker of candlelight, she wrote a short note. "Dear E, I believe in the kind of love you speak of. I spend my days among stories, but rarely live one. Tell me yours. I." She tucked the note beneath the ivy, as instructed. She didn't expect an answer. But the next day, there it was, another letter. And so began a secret exchange of handwritten letters, no names, no details, only thoughts and dreams. Day by day, week by week, the stranger known only as he became a part of Isabel's world. His words were thoughtful, poetic, and filled with a quiet strength. She imagined him as an old soul, perhaps a writer, someone who carried grief like a hidden flame. They spoke of everything: favorite books, childhood dreams, fears of being forgotten. Isabel told him about her father, who had died when she was 17, and how she still wrote poems she never showed anyone. He wrote of the sea, of sailing as a boy with his grandfather, and how the ocean had always felt like a heartbeat calling him home. Yet, they never met. Until one day, a storm swept through the village, tearing branches and flooding streets. When Isabel reached the bridge, she found it damaged, stones crumbled, ivy torn from the wall. Her heart sank. The letters were gone. For weeks, there was silence. She went to the bridge every day, but nothing new ever appeared. Then one Sunday, while helping at a community book event in the village square, Isabel noticed a tall man with a walking cane browsing the poetry section. He was in his early 30s, with a quiet grace about him, and a familiar kind of stillness in his eyes. Their eyes met. She smiled politely and turned away, until he gently approached her. "I'm looking for something that speaks of hope," he said. Without thinking, Isabel reached for a book of Rilke's letters and handed it to him. He smiled. "Perfect choice. Thank you, Isabel." She froze. "How do you know my name?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded, weathered letter, the first one she'd ever written. "I found this again when I returned to the bridge after the storm. I've been waiting ever since. My name is Etienne." Time seemed to stop. Neither of them spoke for a while, until she said softly, "I'm glad you came." So began their next chapter, not in ink, but in heartbeats and quiet conversations over tea, in long walks along the river, and in smiles exchanged across bookshop aisles. The bridge was eventually rebuilt, and people still left letters there. But one day, a new plaque was placed at its center. It read, "In memory of words exchanged in silence, and love that waited to be found, the bridge of letters." And somewhere nearby, Isabel and Etienne walked hand in hand, no longer needing parchment to say what their hearts already knew.